ever since you wrote your book and I've a book on the state police, I said, one day George and I got to get together and talk.
Yeah,
Uh, the history of the state police is rich, and if not for Leo Coakley and you writing the history on it, right? What would there be? So, if we can encourage through this conversation more troops to take part in research and going down to the museum and reading everything that we have down there, or those that have participated in events themselves that are worthy of writing, put pen to paper, if you will.
sure, definitely.
So tell me, I'm curious, and what inspired you to take off where Leo Coakley ended and write the second part of the history?
Um, I read Leo Coakley's book. I don't know, a couple years out of high school, and it was very interesting for me, a young man, and you know, I wanted to be a state trooper at that time, and I followed through and became one. And then I read his book. I guess I was 2 or 3 years in the outfit. I read it again, and I was kind of like surprised that since 1971, in about a 15-year period, nobody had caught up to where Coakley led off. And I'm thinking to myself, man, somebody should really keep, the story going because so much was happening at the time. So, of course, I only had a few years in the outfit at the time. Certainly, a young guy like myself wasn't going to undertake anything like that. And I said to myself, well, you know what? If nobody does it by the time I retire, I'll do it. And 20 some years later, nobody had done it. So I did it, just to follow through the tradition that Coakley had started.
That's a great story. So true in terms of you would think of all the people that we've had that there would be more written about the organization. It seems like sometimes when people write about the organization, it's airing out the dirty laundry, if you
Yeah,
will, as opposed to writing about, it's like a family, right? Every family has bad, right? But family has good as well. So why are we just writing about the bad? Why are we not
right.
writing about the good? So, so it's a wonderful book. You could tell you did a lot of research on it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a lot of writing. I have a hard time bringing my books up until the 70,000 word, uh,
Right.
count. And I don't even come close half the time to 70,000 words. I don't know if you recall what your word count was, but I know it's a pretty extensive volume.
Yeah, I never really received my word count from the publisher, although I self-published it. But I do know that it's roughly 700 pages of text. I think the last couple hundred pages is all of the citations that I utilized throughout the book. So it's upwards of 500 or 600 pages of the actual history story itself.
Yeah, and I love that. I do that as well in my books, citations. I'm a history buff, not just state police, but in general. So when you actually look at the source and where you're getting it, um, not only does it validate what you're writing because you're citing the source and where you got it from,
Right.
but you can actually research it yourself and kind of look at it and go forward from there.
Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
that's what I did with this latest book. I figured because my book is not like yours or Coakley's. It's more like snapshots, here and there of a long. Even though I do it chronological, it's just
Right.
little bits and pieces of history that if anyone wants to take hold of and write on, there's those sites and those resources are where you can get a good jump start.
Well, the interesting thing that I found out before I actually started getting real involved in writing my book was when I interviewed Leo Coakley's wife. I interviewed her, and I found out the true story behind the original Jersey Troopers book. Leo Coakley had suffered a heart attack, and he was still a trooper. Actually, he was a sergeant at the time, and he was home convalescing. And he was going a bit stir crazy. And a good friend of his, Jerome Casey, who they worked together in personnel, said to him, "Listen, why don't you do something to keep busy? Why don't you write a paper about the first 50 years of the state police, because a year or so later was going to be the 50th anniversary." And it all started him just writing a paper about the state police, and it turned into a book. He wound up getting permission from Colonel Kelly at the time, and Kelly was all for it, and that's where the original Jersey Troopers book came about. The funny thing was he wrote the entire book on a manual typewriter in his basement. He and his wife lived in Perth Amboy in a little Cape Cod, and they had hardwood floors. And he had 3 toddlers running all over the house all the time while he was in the basement trying to write this book on a manual typewriter. It was quite a feat at the time. You got to give the guy a lot of credit.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Manual typewriters. I mean, my favorite author, David McCullough, did all his books on a manual typewriter. But he had a team, unlike Coakley. He had a team of people transposing that over.
Sure. Sure.
That's a good story. I never knew that. I never knew that story.
Yeah. You always come across great things. I'm sure that you came across stuff that you never had heard about or knew about, and somebody shared with you. One of the big things that I really took to heart when I was writing the book was when I interviewed General Schwarzkopf, the colonel's father. And I asked him if he had any stories or anything about his father that would be really interesting for members of the state police to read. And he said a couple stories. The first one was when his father was sick with cancer, and he would get leave. He would go and pick him up, and they would take a ride or go someplace or something like that. And he said he remembers one day they were going down the parkway, and every time Schwarzkopf saw a troop car, he'd sit up strong in the seat and he'd wave to the trooper. And the son, General Schwarzkopf, at the time, I think he was the first lieutenant, he couldn't believe that every single trooper waved back, but they didn't know who he was. And for probably the last 7 or 8 years, I go and I do the academy class presentation about the Former Troopers Association about a week before they graduate. And I always tell that story that I went to it. It's great public relations, but it was interesting that a former colonel, would do that, and his son would notice it and remember it that many years ago. The other story was, and Schwarzkopf told me that very few people know about it, but when Schwarzkopf went to war, the First World War, his father had given him a ring, and in the ring was a diamond. It was a diamond ring, and it was his class ring from West Point. And when he was in the war, the ring was damaged, and he lost the diamond. And what happened was when he came back home, his father replaced the diamond in his ring, but it never really sat right. And Colonel Schwarzkopf very rarely wore it. When Schwartz that diamond out of his father's ring and put it in his class ring. So it was, tradition there, passing it down the line.
Can you repeat?
Yes, the ring was damaged, and Schwarzkopf mailed the ring home to his father. Okay, and his father redid the ring, his class ring, and reset the diamond in the ring and kept it home. When Schwarzkopf came home, he was afraid and very rarely wore the ring. Okay, but when Schwarzkopf passed away, his son had the ring, and he took that diamond out of it and had it installed in his West Point class ring.
Oh, nice.
He wore it all the time. So it was a continuation of their family tradition between father and son.
That's a great story. You're a fisherman?
Yes, actually, those are my grandfather's fishing poles. They're both about 100 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I live in Seattle City. I live on the bay in Seattle City, so it's really kind of neat.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah. I love the Jersey Shore.
The Former Troopers Association was incorporated about 63 years, 62, 63 years, in 1959. In November, it was incorporated. But it was incorporated as a fraternal social organization. It was just there as a friendly gesture among retired troopers that would be available to assist other former troopers, the New Jersey State Police, and the law enforcement community at large. So that's what it was originally established as. Over time, it got involved in other aspects of charitable, undertakings and stuff like that, that it really wasn't uh, able in a business sense to do. And I think it was back in 2012 or 2013 that Harry McGurty, who was an attorney at the time, had previously been the president of the Former Troopers Association a few years earlier. And he said that we're really in a position where we could suffer stiff penalties with the Internal Revenue Service if we don't, do something about, reorganizing what the Former Troopers Association does. And that's where it started as far as diversifying our social fraternal organization into actually 3 corporations, which started our NJ Former Troopers Heritage Foundation, which is a 501c3 public charity. And as a subsidiary to that, we have our True Blue and Gold, which is our for-profit logo merchandise store operation. So that put us in line with being, across the board, upfront and legal on all aspects of what FDA business is all about. So that's where we actually started and actually are right now. And it's just a great organization. But we've gotten involved in so much more by doing that diversification over the course of the year that and I'll use the Columbarium Project up at Division headquarters. We would have never been able to build that as a fraternal social organization, but as a public charity, that fell right in our bailiwick. So when it was deemed that the Memorial Garden up at headquarters was unable to accept any more ashes, and it was in disrepair, and it had settled in various areas, and it was a water hazard to the building. It was a situation where we were able to step in, garner donations, both financial, physical, and material donations to actually do that project for the Division of State Police. So it was a really great undertaking, and something that we would have never ever been able to even consider prior to that diversification.
The museum and learning center is a wonderful location. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. The setup that you guys got there, and that right there is the repository for all our history. And
Exactly.
I'm sure you spent many hours in there with all the research that you did. Getting to that, do you have any other writing endeavors in mind? Are you researching anything? Are you looking to take on another project? Where do you stand now with your writing?
I have 2 books that I had actually started. I don't know, probably 7 or 8, maybe 9 years ago. One was a book that was about the last call killing. It was a murder case that solved as a cold case file. Matty Kuhn, when he was in Major Crime, he solved the case, and it was a great story. And the reason that I was going to write another book about it was when I was doing the research for my book, cases like that came up, and I wanted to touch on them. And it was a situation where, as I'm sure you're well aware, when you want to glean actual copies of reports or documents and like that, that aren't in the museum, the best and most efficient way to get them is through in New Jersey is an OPA request. So I filed OPA requests for cases like that. And over the course of time, they come in handy. For instance, like the Warner Forrester murder. They just celebrated the 50th year anniversary of that with moving um, the monument for him from the old New Brunswick station up to headquarters, Cranberry. So they had a 50th year anniversary. Well, a lot of people weren't aware of, who was involved in that investigation and stuff like that. And a lieutenant up at Cranberry called me on the cold, and he says, "I read your book, Jersey Troopers, and you talked about that investigation. Is there any chance that you might be able to, you know, um, give us some ideas of people to contact?" Because they wanted to invite people that were involved in the investigation to this, 50th year anniversary service. Uh, I gave them copies of the whole file, and they just couldn't believe that there were that many people involved, that it was that immense of an investigation. And I said, yeah, I said, that's why we write reports, you know, uh, so that it's memorialized. Whether or not it'll ever be used again in the future, unlike somebody like myself or you who's doing an investigation, they go by the wayside. But they are kind of like how I got that case. But that was a multi-state investigation. There was a big task force, and it was just a set of fingerprints on a plastic bag that evidence was found in, that Mattie Kuhn had analyzed, and they came up with the killer, who was a nurse up in New York City.
Fantastic story. Yeah.
It's a fantastic story, but there's so many nuances about where that investigation went, and how the leads just dried up and fell by the wayside. And if it wasn't for one of the victims' wives calling up our major crimes unit, prior to her daughter getting married a decade or so later on, that would still be a cold.
Wow. And why did she make that call?
Well, it was weighing on her mind that here it was years later, her husband able to walk her down the aisle, and I guess it weighed on her mind. And she says, "Well, I wonder, if they got any new evidence, or have to add to what had happened." And Matty answered the phone, and he says, "You know what? I'll pull the file out, and I'll look through it and see if there's anything that we can look at." And he had just been to school within a few months prior to where they could lift fingerprints off of plastic. And he says, "Well, we still have these plastic bags in our evidence." He's, "I wonder if, the chance is." And they wound up sending the prints up to Canada, because there was only two places in the northern continent. It was the FBI laboratory in Quantico, and I think it was in Montreal. They had a laboratory in Montreal that did the testing. Called the FBI, and they said they probably wouldn't be able to get to it till the following year. And he called Canada, and they said, "How fast can you get the stuff up here?" It was that quick.
That's fantastic, and it does sound like it would be a good story.
Yeah, and then there's another story. A retired sheriff. I was never able to verify much of the information because it was all so old and it was all hearsay. But I'm a bit of a fanatic with the Lindbergh kidnapping. And apparently there was information that was furnished to a trooper decades ago, and he gave me the information hand to hand. And it was a bit of a statement that a gentleman had made from when he was a young man. Whereas on the night the Lindbergh baby was kidnapped, a man of German descent came upon their farm across the state from where the kidnapping took place, and needed a ride to meet someone. It was very important, and he had had an accident with his vehicle. So the son says, "Well, I can take you. I'm going to a meeting not far from there myself." And the guy says, "Well, I'll pay you $10 if you take me to Perth Amboy." where I have to have this meeting and I have to be there before 10 o'clock. So he says, okay, $10 was a lot of money back in the 30s. So they hop in his car. He drives them to Perth Amboy, and they meet a sedan in a parking lot. An older man and a young woman get out of the car and meet between the two vehicles in the headlights. Well, 2.5 years later, when they catch Bruno Hauptmann, he IDs Hauptmann as being the guy who he drove to Perth Amboy the night of the Lindbergh. And the guy that he met, John Condon, who was very involved in that case. So there was some nuances that lend credence to what had taken place, and some that were a little bit far-fetched. I went through it with Mark Falzini on a number of occasions, and we both agreed there's credence to some of the information, but some of the information would be next to impossible to prove. But I thought about writing a story about the fact that maybe everybody was duped in that case, because the possibility lent that this guy was associated with a guy who was associated directly with Lindbergh himself, and that it might have been a planned abduction of the child because the child had rickets and was very involved into the supreme race. All right, because Lindbergh was into eugenics and talk about the supreme race. So him having a son who had disease and everything like that was very bad for him. As far as his mindset was concerned, in what he believed in. So it might have been a planned abduction of the kid. Not to say that the kid was supposed to be killed. That was an accident, but the possibility did exist. So it was like a conspiracy theory kind of book I was thinking about writing based on the information that I got. And I got maybe 100 pages into that, and I kind of like got tied up with something else, and something else happened, and you never get back. Plus, the whole time up until the last couple of years, I was writing the FDA newsletter 3 times a year. Plus, I was heavily involved in administration of the Former Troopers Association, so it was very time consuming.
Yeah, that sounds like a interesting story. And when I was doing research for putting my research together for the on the duty fidelity, I came across that, and there was some push and pull going back and forth between the governor and Schwarzkopf on the Lindbergh kidnapping, because the governor at the time did not believe that we had the right person, and we kind of closed the case just because he was the most popular person of the time. So we needed to put an end to the case and concluded it maybe with the wrong person in cuffs. Don't know if that's it's true, but that would fall in line to a little bit to what you were saying. There's obviously a little bit more there than meets the eye, and maybe the governor at the time caught on to that.
So but then again, we're talking about things that happened in the 1930s that we're looking at from 2020 viewpoint of what took place back there. And I always tell everybody, I said, if you're going to reinvestigate a case, you actually should be reinvestigating it from their technology, from their point of view, from the politics of the day, because things are so much different now than they were back then. You can draw totally different conclusions today based on the example. There's been a lot of lawsuits over the years about, they got the wrong guy, they didn't know what they were doing. I'll tell you the truth, the state police did a fantastic job for being the young agency that they were, and the few tools that they had, to help them along with that case.
Yeah, when you think about it, most of the people that became troopers really didn't have any law enforcement background. So we were just learning, and we pulled the 2 investigators from Jersey City to help us with our first or first murder, Coyle, and they were involved with the Lindbergh case as well. My understanding is correct.
They were actually two of the three individuals that were the first recipients, I believe, of the Distinguished Service Medal.
Yeah,
Jersey.
that's amazing. For those of us that kind of just come in and out, I know I'm guilty of it with the FTA. I was pretty ignorant to everything that you guys do. I actually just kind of thought it was an association to kind of mingle. I saw some other things on there, but even the sales that you have, it's good to know that, because then you know the money's going, when you buy these things, it's going to a good cause, and it's going to further further the cause and secure the state police into the future, which is a good thing. Let's go back to your book, Jersey Troopers. When did that get published? When did that come out?
2009.
Okay, so it's been some time now. It's been some time now. When I see Coakley's book and I see your book, as far as I know, I might be mistaken, I think those are the only two books that strike to the history of the state police. My books kind of touch on it. Honor, Duty, Fidelity, actually, I guess you can say that because it's chronological and it is there's history in there. That's what it's about. But I didn't dive deep into as you and Coakley did. I know Bob Delaney's got some books out there on his story, which are wonderful books. We won't mention the other books that are out there that maybe don't speak too highly of the organization. I know I have a number of complaints about the organization, but I don't write about them. I kind of look at it as a family, right? We don't want to air out our dirty laundry into the public. Although, I could see for those that do, sometimes with the level of frustration, it gets to that level, but you don't want to do that and expose the organization. So it's important. Do you know anyone else that is, actively writing and researching within the organization?
I don't. Other than Jeff Bowman, who's an active trooper up at Division, he's tasked with doing the 100th year anniversary book, and it was originally slated to be a committee because I was on it, and then that COVID came and one thing led to another, and then there was 2 or 3 people that were assigned up at division headquarters, active people that were going to finish it, and if they needed any counsel or background information, they were supposed to reach out to either myself or Frank Rogers, who were the 2 retired members, part of the original 100th year anniversary committee. But I would hope that one day maybe them or some of those individuals that had a touch of that type of research and documentation and stuff like that maybe would pick up the torch when they retire, or even while they're working. There's nothing to say that they can't do it while they're working. So I've got faith that people will pick up the torch. Everybody at least once every few months somebody will comment to me, well, when you're writing the next chapter of the state police history. I says, it's really not my job to write that, and I don't want to put it off as though it's a job, but I really don't think that one individual should do something like that. It was like when I wrote the first chapter in my book. I wanted an introductory chapter for the historical book that I was writing about the state police, but I didn't want to write the chapter from my personal opinion, my viewpoints about what tradition was in the state police. So I got 3 retirees to do it. I got Walt Kretsch, 933, John Leach, 2023, and Kevin Raymond, who had just retired the month before. And he's got a 3,900 badge number. I got them sitting down, over a cup of coffee in the museum, and I just turned a video recorder on, and I was afraid I was going to run out of tape. It was just such a good, 2 or 3 hours, and it was just us sitting down with Mark Falzini, just talking about stuff that happened in the past. I had a half a dozen questions, and it just took off. So that's what really, in my mind, is it really shouldn't be me to write the next book about the state police. It should be somebody else with, with new ideas and another perspective, different history in the state police, different experiences in the state police. A younger guy who's just retiring, who's seen stuff, new technologies and stuff like that I wasn't privy to when I was in the state police. So I really think it should be a tradition where from time to time somebody picks up the torch and carries it for another period of time. That's my personal feeling.
Yeah, agreed. Because you have different people that take different perspectives in their research. Because one thing might interest you that doesn't interest me, but something else that interests me, that doesn't interest you. When I wrote the book about the troopers who died in the line of duty, I wanted to kind of do that to pay tribute to them beyond just the name, right? A little bit of a biography and stuff. My publisher, I mean, what got into print is actually half. My publisher said basically, you're not writing about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. No one really wants to know too much. Well, I kind of disagreed, but it wasn't gonna get published unless I acquiesced with their demands.
Right.
So who knows? One day maybe I do something with that narrative too. But my writing has since evolved. So my writing back then was not where it is now, and hopefully where it is now will be better in the future. So that would require a great deal of editing and stuff. But it's there. And I might start trying to get it out. But, you're right. And I know Joe Polillo, if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly.
Joe Polillo, yeah.
Yeah, his Facebook page is wonderful. Lot of information in it as a researcher that I see and I go, oh, wow. This is stuff that really, I don't know if it is in a museum. I don't know if that's where he's getting it from. But if it's not, whoever the archivist, I don't think there's an archivist now. I know they were looking to replace one, but whoever the archivist is now should go on there every day and start printing out some of that stuff and put it in files. So people, people like you or me or someone else in the future is going to come and write and take it and put it in a book and get it out to the public. But when you had mentioned about, I remember Sal Maggio telling me a long time ago, and you were in the organization during Leo Coakley, right, when that came out, or no?
No. Coakley passed away a couple years before I got into state police.
Okay. I remember Sal Maggio saying that everyone would, there was only a handful of books and everyone passed it around. So the number of books, I guess, sold by Rutgers University Press is probably very limited. And, what a lot of people don't understand is in order to guarantee future books, you should show some interest in the books that exist now, right? Because publishers, unless you self-publishing is a great, most people are self-publishing nowadays. I went to a mystery writers meeting just last week, and it was a New York Times best-selling author there who was just self-published. And it was all on marketing and how she did that, because you don't really have a big printing press behind you,
right,
in order to get that done. So there is still a lot of work, like you said. When you used the word work, and then you said, well, you don't want to. But it is a lot of work to write a book, and I can tell just by the volume of over. I think you said it was 700 pages. I don't recall how many it was. But I know it took you a long time to write that. unless you're a lot faster than I am. But then you got to do research too. So it's time and effort. It's basically pennies on the hour. What a lot of people don't realize. So it's more of trying to get it for authors, unless you're a national, New York Times national bestseller. Then it's probably about the money, and that's why they put them out so quickly. But when you're doing research and history, and you're citing sources, a lot of work involved in that. And so it's more of a work of love than it is a work for reimbursement efforts.
Yeah, it took me about 2.5 years to research and write my book.
Yeah.
Right,
And,
and that wasn't a part-time job either. My wife can attest. I'd work 10, 12 hours most of the time on that book. I'd go to division headquarters, I'd do the research, and then I'd come home and write about it. And that was very time consuming. And as you well know, you write about something, and then you come back a few days later and you read it, and I just don't like the way that sounds, and then you're rewriting it. It's very time consuming. I don't think many people know how time consuming it is. I remember when I was in college, I was taking a professional writing class, and the very first day, the professor said, "Does anybody have any idea how much a professional writer accomplishes in an 8-hour day?" And everybody's coming up, 20 pages, 5 pages, all kinds of guesses. And the guy says, "I wish I could say any of yous were right. An 8-hour day, a professional writer might accomplish 1 page between researching it, writing it, rewriting it, proofing it. It's very, very time consuming, and it's a labor of love. It's not a labor to make a lot of money on, unless, like you say, you're a New York Times bestseller."